to the book of Deuteronomy, it says when Moses died, all of Israel mourned for 30 days. And mourning is very important for humanity, for men and women. It's healthy. You need to grieve because when you experience grief, what you're saying is that person or that event or that place was significant and meaningful to you. And there is a process in the grieving process, and you start with denial. This can't be happening. And then you get angry, and then you try to bargain, and then you get depressed, and then you finally accept whatever the loss was in your life. And the reality is that you can get stuck in any of those phases of the grieving process. And it can take 9 months to a year for you to go through that process. But Paul tells us that, listen, we're going to grieve, we're going to experience loss, but we don't grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We have an eternal perspective on this life so that when we suffer a loss in this life, we know that it's not the end. We have a hope in a future regardless of what we experience on this side of eternity. And so in the beginning verses that Jasmine read, I appreciated that, the Lord paints a picture of the future for Joshua. And you have to have in your mind's eye, in your spirit, in your soul, a picture of what the future of Bethel is going to be. Because if you don't have a picture, you're not going to be able to pursue it and see it come to a reality. And so he paints a picture. This is the picture that the Lord is painting for Joshua. And so he says, listen, you're going to lead these people to cross the Jordan. I know that Moses took them through the Red Sea, but you're going to take them through the Jordan. The Jordan's going to stop. They're going to walk through on dry ground. You're going to do this, Joshua. And then he says, your territory is going to extend from here to there. You know, he paints a picture of how big this territory is going to be. And then he tells them, listen, nobody is going to stand against you. There isn't an enemy that can stand against you. Why? Because I'm going to be with you like I was with Moses. And then he said, I will never leave you or forsake you. How many want that kind of affirmation from God? How many do you know that you already have that affirmation from God? If he is for us, who's going to be against us? And so Joshua verses 6 through 11, I go a little bit further than Jasmine, but that's okay. It says this, be strong and courageous. This is the Lord speaking to Joshua. Because you will lead these people to inherit the land that I swore to their forefathers to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Do not let the book of this law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your supplies ready. 3 days from now, you will cross the Jordan here and go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you for your own. This is God's commissioning of Joshua. And the first thing that he says is, you will lead these people. Now, leading people is kind of like herding cats, okay? Because you all have an opinion. Everybody has a direction they think we should go. And I saw a meme about cats and dogs. And it was kind of cute, so I thought I'd just stick it in here for entertainment purposes. But when you come home and you have a dog, now I have no pets. It was part of our marriage vows. Thou shalt have no pets. And so, but I love animals, and I especially love other people's animals, because, you know, if you come home and you have a dog, my daughter has a dog, and when we go to visit, man, the dog, the tail doesn't wag, the whole body just wags, and the tongue is out, and he's panting, and he's like, oh, I can't wait. And he likes to lick face. My wife hates that. I don't particularly care for it, because I think about what he licked before he licked my face, and sorry. But a dog looks at you, and you are God, because you provide everything for him. You pick up their poop. You know, you just do everything for the dog, and the dog just loves you without reservation, and he loves you. You're God. If you have a cat, you go home to a cat, and the cat looks at you with disdain. And that cat thinks that it's God, because you do everything for it. You provide for it. And if the cat feels like it, it may crawl up in your lap and let you pet him or her, whichever it is. That's kind of what it's like leading people. And so being in leadership puts a bullseye on your back, because everyone has an opinion. Everybody thinks they know how the leader could or should do better. Matter of fact, I was working with a young leader. He was in his first lead role, and we would get together once a month, once every couple of weeks, and we would talk about what's going on, what's he's thinking, what's he's seeing. And one of the things he shared, he said, I'm a little concerned because the people are talking. And I looked at him and said, yep, that's what they do. I said, you're not going to stop people from talking, but your job is to give them as little to talk about as possible. You're not going to stop them, but you just need to realize that your job is not to provide fodder for the cannon. If you're familiar with cannons, they stick the fodder in before the cannonball, and that's what kind of propels it out. You don't need to give them any more than what they already have created in their imagination. And the truth is, every leader can do better. But they don't need critics, they need partners. In Exodus, the 17th chapter, we see the prime example of this, and it's where they're traveling and they're fighting the Amalekites. And if you remember this, Joshua is in the valley, and he's fighting the Amalekites, and Moses and Aaron and Hur are up on the hill. And as long as Moses' hands are raised, Joshua and the Israelites are winning. But when he got tired and his hands came down, the Amalekites started to win. So what did Aaron and Hur do? They found a rock, and they said, hey, Moses, have a seat here. I'm going to stand on your right, and he's going to stand on your left, and we're going to hold your hands up. And that is how the Israelites won the battle. And so you need to understand, when the new leader comes in here, he's going to make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. We don't know if it's male, female, but they're going to make mistakes. Don't be a critic. Hold up their hands so the victory will come. David, when he was on the run from Saul, in 1 Samuel 22, this is what happened to him. Saul's out to kill him. He takes off. He's on the run, and it says this: all those who were distressed or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. Now, if I were to pick a team, we have the all-star in baseball. We've got the Pro Bowl in football. They pick the best of the best to be on these teams. I would not be picking those who are in debt, discontented, or distressed. But that's who David had around him. 400 men gathered around him, and David became their leader. The truth is, most people want to be led. They want to go to a destination, and one of the jobs of the leader is to lead. My wife and I made a decision for our kids when they were young. And the decision was they are not allowed to date. Dating is not part of our family values. And my family is, they're not believers. And so, we would visit and talk, and this came up. No, my kids are not allowed to date. And my family just laughed. You can't stop them. I said, yes, we can. And so now this is critically important. We invested a lot of time and energy in our kids when they were this big, so that when they were this big, we would have influence. They knew that they were loved. They knew that we were there to protect them. They knew that we were available to them when they were this big. And so as they grew, we said, listen, we don't think it's a good idea for you to date. And they looked at us. Now, my wife worked in the school where my kids went, and they were pairing off in 4th and 5th grade. So in 4th and 5th grade, we're having this conversation with all 3 of our kids. Now, my son was in like 6th, and my daughter was in 4th, and my baby was in 3rd. They were all 2 years apart. And so, but it was a normal part of our conversation in our family. And we said, we don't think that you should date, and here's why. 1, dating is for the purpose of finding your lifelong companion. Are you ready to get married? No. Well, then there's no real purpose for you to date. Number 2, you're going to deal with real emotions, powerful emotions, and you're just not mature enough to be able to handle those emotions. And the reality is that it's going to end badly. You're going to get your heart broken, or you're going to break somebody else's heart at best. At worst, you're going to do something that's going to impact the rest of your life. And so it was the purpose of dating is to find your lifelong companion. You're going to deal with real emotions. What was the third one? Anybody help me here? Education. No, that wasn't it. I'll tell you next week. Lifelong change. But we had one more reason. But it was funny because ready to get married. Yeah. Okay. That was it. Yes. Lifelong repercussions. But then when my baby was in 8th grade, some boys came and said, "Can you want to go to the 8th grade dance with me?" And she just looked at them and said, "I'm not allowed." And what do you mean you're not allowed? We're not allowed to date. And these boys were not real bright, because then they went to my wife, who's one of the teachers, and they said, "Ashley said that she's not allowed to date." My wife sat those boys down and said, "That's right, and this is why." And she took them through dating. It is to find your lifelong companion. Dating, You're going to deal with emotions that you're not mature enough to handle, and you may make a decision that will impact you for the rest of your life. Now, the difference between a dictator and a leader, a dictator will say, because I say so. And they will use coercion, threats, and violence to get their way. A leader will take the time to explain the why behind why this is a good decision. And because they trusted us, because they knew that we were looking out for their best interest, because they knew that we loved them, one of the things that just ripped out my heart, my daughter was like 17, and she was getting involved with and when they were seniors in high school, they could go out on a date. They had to start learning about relationships. And I went to my daughter and I said, Allie, I said, I love you just so much. I want to do everything I can to keep you from getting hurt. And she looked me in the eye and she said, Daddy, you can't. And it just crushed me that I could not protect her from being hurt. But I was going to do everything I could to keep her safe. And so, God says to Joshua, lead these people. And that just has a whole lot of ramifications. Secondly, he says, be careful. Be careful. The law that I gave to Moses has a very important purpose, and it is to help you be successful. He's not a killjoy. He doesn't want to rob you of having a fun time. He wants to protect you. And so it starts with this. Listen, obedience will bring success wherever you go. If you live a biblical life and not just simply follow rules, but let it transform. When I talk to people about religion, I said religion is about outward conformity to rules, but faith is about an inward transformation of the soul, where your priorities, your values, your perspective, all of those things are radically different. And so he says, listen, obedience is going to bring success. So I want you to be careful. And he says this thing, do not let the book of the law depart from your mouth. Okay? I like the way Jasmine's version said it better, because it took me a few minutes to figure out, okay, what is he saying? But basically what he's saying is don't stop talking about it. Don't stop talking about what God's word says. And something that we practiced in our house is what I call soul talk. And that'll be, my wife and I will be in the car and we'll listen to a song, and, a song will come on the radio, and I'll look at her and say, I don't really agree with the theology of that song. Because I love music, I love the worship, I love singing, but some of our songs, their theology is just a little messed up. Or we might go to church somewhere, and when we go home, we'll talk about the message. With our kids, we looked for windows to the soul. When you deal with young people, how many know that they're not always open to talking? Matter of fact, my son, we went a full year without having a real conversation because we get, no, yes. That was the depth of our conversation. He was about 16, 17. He was becoming his own man and those kind of, and that's all part of the growth process, and we didn't freak out much. But for kids, you've got to look for those opportunities that you can speak truth into the soul, and you can't schedule that. You've got to be sensitive to the leading of the Spirit. With me and my son, a lot of that happened on the golf course. We'd be out playing golf, and we'd be talking about the Yankees or the Dolphins. We're Dolphins fans. And all of a sudden, one of us would say something, and all of a sudden the whole conversation would take a turn. And all of a sudden we were talking soul. And it made such a difference. So, soul talk. Talk about what God is saying to you. He says, meditate on it day and night. Now, meditation is focused thought. Now, I'm ADD, so focused thought for me is a lot of work. But I do it. It requires effort and intentionality to meditate upon the Word of God. And then he says, do everything in it. How many here realize that love and faith are action words? They're not this nebulous thing, but it requires action. Jesus said in John 6:13, God so loved that he gave. James tells us, you tell me what you believe, I will show you what I believe by what I do. We need to understand. Unfortunately, most people are not careful. They make decisions emotionally. They make decisions that are convenient. They make decisions that are easy rather than deliberately with an eye on eternity. Our mantra is immediate gratification. Our culture is, I want it now. Let me buy it on time. While working at Amazon, when I left my lead role in 2020, my wife was still working, and she looked at me and says, you're not sitting home while I'm working. And then COVID hit and everything shut down. The only place I could get a job was Amazon. So right down in Carteret, I was there for 2 years. And so I was working there, and just because of who I am, they eventually learned that I had spent 30 plus years in the ministry and in the pastorate, and some people would call me pastor, across the warehouse. And so while I was working there, my 31-year-old daughter was getting married. And I had built some connections and those kinds of things. And, it's kind of a big deal. So I'm kind of excited. And so I was talking with one of the ladies there, and I said, oh, man, my daughter's getting married in July. She dated a couple of clowns before she found her prince. And I said, we're just so excited. She's 31 years old, and she's been patient and waiting. And dead serious, she looked at me. She goes, how many kids does she have? And I went, none. And it would, for me, I was not raised in the church, but I had spent 40 years in the church, and it was a culture shock. Because for me, that's like, and everybody, there are people who make mistakes, God redeems. I don't want anybody feeling guilty or condemned. God redeems and he restores. But it was, for me, it was like, I had 3 kids, and to the best of my knowledge, they were all virgins when they got married. I had a son, I had 2 daughters. We worked very hard at helping them understand that their bodies are sacred temples. And they're not playgrounds. And so we need to be careful. We don't need to be judgmental. We don't need to be condemning. We don't need to say, I'm right, you're wrong. We need to be compassionate. We need to be empathetic. They are broken and lost people out there that need a Savior that loves them. And we are God. We are Jesus' hands and feet. In Ephesians 5, it says this, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. We live in evil times. And we have to be careful how we live. Now, being careful is not living in fear. It's living with intentionality. It's living with eternity in focus. The end result, God says, that you will be prosperous and successful. When we live out a biblically based life, this is the end result. And I want you to know that prosperity and success has nothing to do with money. It has to do with healthy relationships with God, with other people in your life. It has to do with feeling secure and safe. Money plays a part in that, but don't ever get caught up with the idea that money is going to solve your problems. Jesus will solve your problems. And so we need, he tells Joshua, you're going to lead these people into the promised land. You have to be careful. And then he says, tell them. Tell them. God has given Joshua a picture of what the future could look like, leading these people. And he gives them that warning. And then right before Joshua takes his first step in this new role as the nation's leader, realize Moses, 40 years, was the leader. This is Joshua's first leadership decision. And God says this in our text. It says, have I not commanded you? He is reaffirming to Joshua that you're the man. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. He is just affirming Joshua. The book of Hebrews gives us this admonition. It says, obey your leaders and submit to their authority. They keep watch over you as men who must give an account. Obey them so that their work will be a joy and not a burden, for that would be of no advantage to you. See, even God knows that we are first very self-centered. And so he's appealing to the fact that this will be beneficial to you if you obey your leaders. And the reality is that every pastor, and this was always my mindset, every pastor who leads a church is going to be held to account. As a matter of fact, in Timothy, I think it says, not many of you should desire to be teachers because you're going to be held to a higher standard. We are all saved by the grace of God through faith in Jesus Christ. But once we enter the kingdom, there are different levels of reward based on our faithfulness. Leadership is not for the faint of heart. You have to maintain a tender heart, and you need to have the skin of a rhinoceros. Because it's easy to become terrified when people talk. It's easy to become discouraged because even when you give your best, sometimes, and for some people, it's just not good enough. And sometimes, as leaders, we blow it. We just make a bad decision. I could share with you many leadership horror stories from my own 30-plus years of leading in the church, but I'll save that for another time. One of the primary purposes for a leader is to be able to clearly set the direction for the church. That's one of a pastor's primary roles, is to clearly set the direction for the community of faith under the headship of Christ. Back in the 90s, I had a guest speaker. And back in the 90s, leadership was a hot topic. John Maxwell was a guru, and he's got a lot of very valuable, important lessons on leadership that I can't afford to ignore. But I had a guest speaker come in, And it was somebody I knew and respected and trusted. And he came in, he says, listen, we don't have a leadership problem. Totally counter to the trend in the church. He says we have a fellowship problem. We have pastors that aren't following Jesus, and we have congregations that aren't following pastors. Made a lot of sense. So one of the primary responsibilities for a pastor is to set the direction clearly. The second is to take care of the flock. Now, that comes with a host of pitfalls. Sometimes it's not helping. Sometimes it's speaking the truth in love. Sometimes it's sacrificially serving. There's a lot of key things for the leader to do, for a congregation to rise up and move forward and see momentum being built. That's going to be one of the major challenges for your new leader is, are you going to rise up and move when he says, this is the mountain, let's take it? Okay, you got one. The Old Testament is filled with a lot of boundaries, a lot of rules, a lot of lines. And right now, the board and I, we're working on putting together a policy manual, okay? Can I be really honest with you? Boring. I'm a big picture guy. I'm an action-oriented guy. Give me a hammer and nails. Send me out to do something. But I'm not a detail guy. That's why my wife balances our checkbook. I'm just never been really good at math and details, but give me an action plan and I will run with it. But a policy manual are the guardrails of the highway that you want to drive on to get you to where God wants you to go. It keeps you from going off the road. And as much as I don't like it, it is so vitally important for any church to have these guardrails up. How are we going to function? And so we're working on it, and Lord willing, we'll have it close to completed by the time the new leader comes in. We need it. You need to understand how we function if we're going to move forward. So with all that said, Joshua gives the order. Get ready. 3 days, we're going in. 3 days, we're going in. When God raises up the next leader here at Bethel, I want you ready to run. I want to come back for a visit. In a year after the new leader comes, and love you dearly, but I want to see so many people I don't recognize that they'll look at me like David did and said, "Who are you?" Can you believe that with me? I believe it's going to happen. I believe God's already got the person picked. I believe it's just a matter of us following the Spirit, and God is going to raise up the next leader, and this place is going to erupt because the board and I are doing everything we can to set the table so that when they come, they can run. And I want you to run with them. John 14 says this, "I tell you the truth. Anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these because I am going to the Father." I believe greater things are coming. So if you want to take the promised land, follow the leader. The new pastor will lead you. He will be careful to follow Jesus, and he will tell you where you need to go. And I thought it would be appropriate this morning from this message, because ultimately Jesus is our leader and we want to follow him. And so I thought it would be appropriate for us to have communion at the end of this message. So I want to invite the deacons to come.